Well, thank you very much. I would have appreciated if I would have the same help as you, but pronouncing the Israeli names. I have some difficulties with this, but I will try to manage anyway. Well, probably that would be the solution. But on that cooperation, I will come in a few minutes. Well, shalom. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to present the role of Europol towards you. I would like to thank Professor Gano for asking us to be here. And it's also a special reason because we have now for 1 year a working arrangement with the Israeli police. We have a liaison at Europol working with us, and that already showed how we could improve our cooperation. For the next 15 minutes, I would like to bring you the European view on terrorism. One of our flagship products is about the annual threat assessment from terrorism. And if you allow me, I will give you some inside views. But before doing so, I think I have to explain a little bit what Europol is, for those who are not familiar with this. We are the European Law Enforcement Agency. We support 2 million law enforcement officers in the European Union. Without any coercive powers, we assist them by setting up operations, by giving them expertise, by having a message systems that applies throughout the whole world. We have a lot of data on organized crime in our databases. But we also, and I want to emphasize this, have more than 260 liaison officers of 45 countries in our building. There's no other place in the world in which you have that kind of expertise and representation from not only 28 member states, but also from countries like Israel, Turkey, the United States, Norway, and I can go on with this. And if you want to summarize what we are doing, there are 5 C's that I would like to mention towards you. First of all, we collect information on organized crime and terrorism. Then we try to make the connection between ongoing investigations from one country to the other, because some, as you know, cross-border crime will operate in every country more or less. It's also for us to make coalitions within law enforcement, to start up an investigation, to work with each other, but also coalitions with the private industry to make sure that we understand each other and get their knowledge in crime, in financial and fraud towards our officers. We coordinate a lot of actions, global actions, on the European scale, on the different fields. And finally, we try to create new ways of investigations. We are being innovative. One of the things in the terrorist field that we are operating is a facial recognition system that already proved to be very successful, because you know a name doesn't say anything in our modern world. But that's about Europol, that's our role, and I'll come towards those C's back at the end of my presentation. As said, what I would like to do is at least to give you a view on the European situation. This report was issued just in end of June. It's an annual report and gives the overview of what's happened in Europe in the last year. It comes from contributions from the member states. There's also a global part in there, but it's focused more or less on the amount of activities in the European Union. You see the amount of terrorist attacks, including not only jihadist terrorism, but also left and right-wing terrorism. And one of the conclusions is, if you look at the number of attacks, it's decreased. But it's also clear that that's not the only picture, the amount, but also the way that this form of terrorism is developing. The report is online, so I see somebody taking a picture, but you can find it on our website, so it's an open source for the moment. Looking a little bit closer into 2019 on the amount of completed jihadist attacks. Well, you see that there is a lower number in total in completed attacks, but also a strong increase in the failed attacks. 24 jihadist attacks in the EU, 7 of them completed, 1 failed, and 16 failed. So as I said, the lower number doesn't say everything, because you have to realize that the situation, even in Europe, has become more complex. The amount of disrupted jihadist terrorist plots increased substantially. So you could say we are successful as intelligence and law enforcement, or is the picture changing from the background of the terrorist attacks? One alarming thing is also that in those disrupted plots, we had 3 CBRN-related attacks, and people trying to prepare a chemical or biological bomb, more or less, or at least an attack in this field. One other thing I would like to mention is that we also saw that the distinction between online and offline terrorism seems to be more blurred even and increasing. While the number of foreign fighters that went towards the conflict zone and the returnees was not expected that high as expected, still we have to realize that there are a lot of Europeans in the conflict zone staying, not only the foreign fighters but also their families and children that have been probably also heavily traumatized by this. And to be honest, the European Union doesn't have a real solution how to deal with this. Bring them back, leave them over there, or try to de-radicalize them. It's also clear that the focus of jihadist attacks has been shifted towards the situation in the European Union itself. Looking at the completed attacks, all of them were done by people that were living already in the European Union. So there were no attacks from foreign fighters returning. Also, the amount of victims luckily went down from 62 towards 13. 53 people were injured. And there was a strong focus, but that's not new, on towards the symbol of power, being military, being police, and also focusing on civilians. In the same way also as it goes for weapons, I think the use of firearms, but also the use of other ways of attacking people with very simple arms like knives or cars were detected in this field. Looking at one of the forms of terrorism, right-wing terrorism, because I would like to emphasize a little bit on this. Sorry, before doing so, I will look at the terrorist arrests, because that's the other part in there. There you see the overview of the development within the European Union. And as all years, all previous years, the amount of jihadist terrorism represented the largest proportion of total arrests. More than 500 were arrested in this field. But what we also see is a strong increase in the amount of arrests related to left-wing and right-wing terrorism. And there is still a strong concern that because of the arrests, because of the people that are in our prisons, there will be also some radicalization happening in the prisons that could have their effect in the future. Now, looking forward towards the more or less left-wing and right-wing terrorism. As in most previous years, the number of left-wing activities and right-wing attacks remained relatively low and was limited towards a low number and also a few countries in there. However, the number of arrests, as I already mentioned, increased very strongly. Actually, it doubled in the last year. And in the last years, I think there was a strong attention in the European Union for jihadist terrorism, but we also realized that there is a strong increase on the right wing, especially activities in the field, and we have to step up for the next future. Based on information gathered at Europol and our assessment, and we just issued another report on right-wing terrorism, we believe that individuals in the European Union, but also groups, either acting alone or in group, are willing and prepared to commit attacks in the future from a right-wing background. So we have to put more attention in this field in the upcoming years. Having said this, probably focusing a little bit on this issue. First of all, I have to say that jihadist terrorism remains our priority, but the growing concern from law enforcement is also fueled by what happened in the world outside of Europe. We have seen attacks in Christchurch. We have seen in the aftermath of this also some recent attacks in 2019 in Europe, in March and April, but also the mass shooting that was already mentioned by the director of the FBI this morning. And the issue is that the distinction between right-wing violent extremism and right-wing terrorism is very difficult to make. The picture is totally different. We see another scene, especially the music scene, is a scene that's being used by right-wing extremists also to gather money. And as a law enforcement, probably we have to make sure that we have a better understanding on this. Because they tried right-wing terrorism and groups continue to show an interest in getting firearms and production of explosive. The use of social media has made it also that traditional organizations don't count so much anymore. The online activity is increasing strongly. And finally, there is also a strong perceived international link that we haven't seen before in this field. So there are some reasons for Europol to put extra attention in this field. There is at the end also some concern, because if you look at the EU list of terrorism, there is no single right-wing groups on there. So a discussion at least is needed to see if this would be necessary. And as Europol, we realized that we have to have a stronger emphasis on this field. So we have an analytic project that's called Dolphin, in which we ask member states to help us to get a better understanding of the actual picture. And what's also needed at the end is that there is a real cross-border response of investigative activities on this field. And I mentioned already the fact that the music industry, the concerts are a very important moment to make sure that also law enforcement is visible and has attention for what's happening over there. So in concluding the main trends from TSZ, well, terrorist threat is not diminished, it's getting even more complex. The travelers and the expected travelers from the conflict zone have not come back, so at least in a very low amount. But still, they are there in the detention zones, and we have to see how this will develop. Already mentioned this morning, we have a lot of attention for IS, but Al-Qaeda is still there, and their influence is growing at the expense of IS. Right-wing terrorism, the arrests are relatively low, but increasing and doubled, and the activities, and especially what happened in 2019, makes it necessary to put extra attention towards this. And the use of alternative online platforms after actions from police is there. There are a lot of, especially in the telegraph part and in the direct contact activities from IS and Al-Qaeda. A little bit in depth, something that's mentioned in our report, but I just wanted to highlight over here. When the slide also comes up. Yeah, sorry, now I have to go back. 3 elements I want to mention that are also touched on in our assessment, but as a discussion point over here. There has been a lot of talking about the convergence of cyber and terrorism. So people are wondering why is there attention within IS for cyber, and are we facing a potential attack in this field? Well, our view is that we have seen interest, and there is a big knowledge of ISIS on social media and on encryption, but a very low knowledge for the moment towards, let's say, other forms, either or going beyond the defacements that we have seen a few, but all bought with commercial products. So we don't see for the moment a real activity in this field. Well, we are a law enforcement agency, not an intelligence operation, but this is a field in which there could be developments in the near future. The role of women. There's an extensive report also from our side. We have been looking into how it's presented within IS and Al-Qaeda, and we see a shift. Since 2017, there is a more active role of women requested from the terrorist organization, not only to be an UMA, but also be active in the field of committing attacks. And the way that this develops and the influence it has on children, I think that's something I would like to ask for attention for. And finally, on the non-violent terrorist content, we are, as Europol, taking down more than 100,000 messages that have violent content, but there is no opportunity to take down the non-violent terrorist content. And I mean the songs and the poems that are on there, and in our view, on the long term, could have a stronger effect even than the violent content in there. Finally, The future CT cooperation, our view on this. Well, there has been a strong change after the attacks in Paris. There's a stronger EU framework. We have all kinds of directives coming up, the latest one on content online, that help us to fight terrorism. As Europol, we have been building on trust building, so making sure that we understand each other in the CT community. And the ECTC is now a center of exchange, our center for CT operations even before any active action has taken place. We invested in big data because nowadays terrorist investigation is all about big data analytical work, and we try to come up with new solutions like the facial recognition or a system to learn from social media. We have to work with each other, pulling our capabilities in the tools and be in the operation field. That's what we're trying to do. And this means continued engagement, not only from, let's say, the law enforcement, but especially also on conferences on this. And to conclude, I mentioned the 5 Cs. I think they're also here. So we are here today, I think, by all of you, to collect knowledge, and I think that's very important. We have to connect persons to each other, but also expertise in this field. We have to coordinate our research because we have to identify in conferences on this to research way forward. And we have to form coalitions between law enforcement, between academia, but also probably with the private industry. Social media is a very important one. And finally, we have to create new views for the future because, as it mentioned in the naming of this conference, it's about looking towards the future. Terrorists will not disappear. We have to be ready. And by working here together with you and with law enforcement, hopefully we are ready to do so. Thank you very much.